Mother Bear paced on two legs. When the baby's pulse dropped, what happened next was shocking. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The old cabin sat quietly in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by thick pine trees that seemed to whisper secrets in the evening wind. Inside, Rosalie Chen held her 3-month-old son close to her chest, feeling his tiny heartbeat against her skin. Something felt different tonight. Something felt wrong. "Marcus, come here," she called softly to her husband, who was fixing the broken window latch in the kitchen. The baby, little Kai, had been fussier than usual all day. His normally bright eyes seemed dull, and his little hands felt cooler than they should. Marcus wiped his hands on an old towel and walked over. His weathered face, marked by years of working outdoors, showed concern as he looked at his wife. "What is it, Rose?" "Feel his forehead," she whispered, not wanting to wake the baby if he had finally fallen asleep. But Kai wasn't sleeping. His eyes were open, staring at nothing, and his breathing seemed shallow. Marcus placed his rough palm gently on his son's tiny forehead. The baby felt cold. Too cold. "Maybe we should call the doctor," he said, but they both knew their old phone had been acting up for weeks, and the nearest hospital was 3 hours away on winding mountain roads. Outside, something large moved through the trees. Neither Marcus nor Rosalie noticed at first, too focused on their baby's condition. But the creature moving in the darkness had noticed them. A massive brown bear, easily 7 feet tall when standing, had been watching their cabin for the past hour. The bear was not alone. A small cub, no more than a few months old, stayed close to its mother's side. But tonight, the mother bear seemed restless. She kept lifting her head, sniffing the air, as if she could sense something the humans inside could not. "His breathing is getting weaker," Rosalie's voice cracked with fear. She had read about this in parenting books. Sometimes babies just stopped breathing for no reason. The thought terrified her more than anything else in the world. Marcus felt helpless. He was good with his hands, could fix almost anything mechanical, but this was his child's life hanging in the balance. "Let me try to get the truck started. We need to get him to a hospital." As Marcus stepped outside to check their old pickup truck, he froze. There, not 20 feet from their front porch, stood the largest bear he had ever seen. The animal was on its hind legs, swaying back and forth like it was dancing or pacing. Its massive head turned toward Marcus, but instead of aggression, he saw something else in those dark eyes, something almost human. "Rose," Marcus called back toward the house, his voice barely above a whisper. "Rose, don't come outside." But it was too late. Rosalie had heard the strange tone in her husband's voice and was already at the doorway, still holding baby Kai. When she saw the bear, her first instinct was to scream, but the sound caught in her throat. The bear was not threatening them. Instead, it was looking directly at the baby in her arms. And then, something incredible happened. The massive creature let out a low, mournful sound. Not quite a growl, not quite a cry. It was the sound of a mother in distress. "Marcus," Rosalie whispered, her voice shaking. "Look at her." The bear's own cub was at her feet, and the similarities between the two mothers, one human, one wild, became suddenly, startlingly clear. Both were holding their babies. Both were afraid. Inside the cabin, baby Kai's breathing became even more labored. His tiny chest barely moved up and down, and his skin was starting to take on a bluish tint around his lips. Rosalie felt panic rising in her chest like a tide she couldn't stop. The mother bear seemed to sense the crisis inside the cabin. She dropped to all fours and began pacing back and forth in front of their home, her massive paws leaving deep prints in the soft earth. Her cub followed, confused but loyal. "What does she want?" Marcus asked, more to himself than to his wife. That's when they heard it. A sound neither of them had ever heard before. The bear was humming, a low, rhythmic sound that seemed to vibrate through the air itself, and impossibly, baby Kai's eyes turned toward the open door, as if he could hear it too. Rosalie looked down at her son and gasped. For just a moment his breathing seemed to steady. His little fingers, which had been curled into tight fists, relaxed slightly. "Did you see that?" she whispered to Marcus. The bear continued her pacing, continued her strange humming sound, and with each passing moment baby Kai seemed to respond. His color improved slightly. His breathing, while still weak, became more regular. "This is impossible," Marcus said, but he couldn't deny what he was seeing with his own eyes. The mother bear stopped pacing and looked directly at Rosalie. For a long moment, the two mothers stared at each other across the space between wild and human worlds, and in that moment Rosalie understood something that would change her life forever. The bear was trying to help, but as Rosalie stood there, holding her baby who was now breathing a little easier, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The mother bear wasn't just looking at baby Kai, she was looking at the small wooden cross that hung above their doorway. The same cross that had belonged to Rosalie's grandmother, passed down through 3 generations of women who had all lived in these mountains. Marcus saw his wife's expression change. "Rose, what is it?" "That cross," she whispered, pointing upward. "My grandmother told me stories about it. She said it protected families from harm, but she also said—" Rosalie's voice trailed off as memories flooded back to her. "Said what?" Marcus pressed, though he kept his eyes on the massive bear who was now sitting on her haunches, still watching them intently. "She said the cross would call for help when a child was in danger, but I always thought she meant human help." Rosalie's hands were trembling now, not just from fear, but from the impossible realization that was dawning on her. The mother bear suddenly stood up again and began walking closer to the cabin. Marcus instinctively stepped in front of his family, but the bear wasn't moving aggressively. Instead, she was moving with purpose, as if she had been called to this place. Baby Kai, who had been quiet for the past few minutes, suddenly let out a small cry. It wasn't the weak, labored sound they had been hearing all day. This was stronger, more alert. Both parents looked down at their son in amazement. "His color is coming back," Rosalie breathed, hardly daring to believe it. The bear was now only 10 feet away from them, close enough that they could see the intelligence in her dark eyes, close enough to see the scars on her massive paws from years of survival in the wilderness, close enough to see that around her neck, almost hidden in her thick fur, was something that shouldn't have been there. "Marcus," Rosalie's voice was barely a whisper. "Look at her neck." Marcus squinted in the dim evening light. At first, he couldn't see what his wife was talking about. But then the bear turned her head slightly and there it was. A thin leather cord, old and weathered, with what looked like a small piece of carved wood hanging from it. "That's impossible," Marcus said. But even as he spoke the words, he knew he was looking at something that challenged everything he thought he knew about the natural world. The bear's cub, who had been staying close to its mother, began to whimper softly. The sound was heartbreaking. A baby calling for its mother's attention. The mother bear immediately turned to her cub, nuzzling it gently with her massive head, making soft, reassuring sounds. Watching this display of maternal love, Rosalie felt tears streaming down her face. Here was this wild creature, this dangerous predator, showing the same tender care for her baby that Rosalie felt for hers. But there was something more happening here, something that went beyond simple animal behavior. "The stories," Rosalie whispered suddenly. "The old stories my grandmother used to tell." "What stories?" Marcus asked, though he never took his eyes off the bear. "She used to say that long ago, before the first settlers came to these mountains, there was a Native American woman who lived alone in the forest. She had lost her own baby to sickness, and in her grief she prayed to the spirits of the mountain to watch over all the children who would come after." The mother bear was listening to Rosalie's voice, her head tilted as if she understood every word being spoken. "The woman died that winter, but the elders said her spirit became one with the mountain's guardian, a great bear who would appear whenever a child was in mortal danger." Rosalie's voice was stronger now, as if speaking the words aloud was helping her understand what was happening. Marcus wanted to dismiss his wife's words as folklore, but baby Kai was definitely breathing better now. The blue tinge around his lips was almost completely gone, and his little hands were moving with more strength than they had shown all day. The mother bear began to make that humming sound again, but this time it was different. This time, it sounded almost like a lullaby. Her cub settled down beside her, apparently comforted by the sound, and incredibly, baby Kai's eyes began to close, as if he too was being soothed by the ancient melody. "This can't be real," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. That's when they heard the sound of another vehicle approaching on the gravel road that led to their cabin. Both Rosalie and Marcus turned toward the sound, momentarily distracted from the incredible scene playing out in front of them. The headlights of a pickup truck cut through the gathering darkness, and as the vehicle got closer, they could see it was their neighbor, Tom Brennan, who lived about 5 miles down the mountain. But what was he doing here at this hour? Tom's truck came to a stop behind Marcus's old pickup, and the engine went quiet. For a moment, nobody moved. Tom sat in his truck, staring at the massive bear that was still sitting calmly in front of the Chen family's cabin. The bear turned her head to look at the newcomer but showed no signs of alarm or aggression. Slowly, Tom opened his truck door and stepped out. He was a man in his 60s, someone who had lived in these mountains his entire life. If anyone would know how to handle a bear encounter, it would be Tom. But instead of reaching for the rifle that Marcus knew Tom always kept in his truck, the older man simply stood there, his face pale in the headlights' glow. "I felt like I needed to come check on you folks," Tom called out, his voice shaky. Had the strangest feeling something was wrong up here. Rosalie and Marcus exchanged glances. Tom lived 5 miles away. There was no way he could have known about their baby's condition, and certainly no way he could have known about their unusual visitor. "Tom," Marcus called back, "how did you know to come?" The older man shook his head slowly. "Strangest thing. I was sitting on my porch about an hour ago, and I swear I heard singing coming from up this way. Sounded like an old native song my grandfather used to hum when I was a boy. Made me feel like someone needed help." The mother bear turned her attention back to baby Kai, who was now sleeping peacefully in his mother's arms. The bear's humming had stopped, but the sense of calm that had settled over the clearing remained. "There's something else," Tom said, stepping closer but still maintaining a respectful distance from the bear. "My grandfather told me stories about this mountain. Said there was a spirit guardian who protected the families who lived here. Never believed it myself until tonight." The bear's cub suddenly stood up and began walking toward baby Kai. Rosalie instinctively pulled her son closer to her chest, but the mother bear made a soft, chuffing sound. Not a threat, but what sounded almost like reassurance. The cub approached slowly, its small nose twitching as it caught the scent of the human baby. When it was close enough, it reached out one tiny paw and gently touched the blanket that wrapped around Kai. At that moment, baby Kai opened his eyes. They were bright and alert, completely different from the dull, unfocused gaze he had worn just an hour earlier. He looked directly at the bear cub, and impossibly he smiled. "Did you see that?" Rosalie gasped. All three adults had seen it. A 3-month-old baby, who just moments earlier had been struggling to breathe, was now alert and responsive, smiling at a wild bear cub as if they were old friends. The mother bear stood up slowly, towering over all of them. She looked once more at baby Kai, then at Rosalie, and made a sound that could only be described as satisfied. Her work here was done. But as she turned to leave, something caught the light from Tom's headlights. The leather cord around her neck shifted, revealing more clearly what hung from it. It wasn't just a piece of carved wood. It was a small wooden cross, identical to the one hanging above the Chen family's door. "That's my grandmother's cross," Rosalie whispered in shock. "But that's impossible. She was buried with it 20 years ago." The implications of what she was saying hit all of them at once. If the bear was wearing Rosalie's grandmother's cross, and if the old stories about the mountain guardian were true, then what they had witnessed tonight wasn't just an amazing coincidence. It was a miracle that had been 20 years in the making. The mother bear and her cub began walking back toward the tree line, but just before they disappeared into the forest, the mother bear turned back one final time. In that moment, Rosalie could have sworn she saw something familiar in those dark eyes, a warmth, a love that reminded her of someone she had lost long ago. "Grandma," she whispered into the night air. The bear's response was a soft, rumbling sound that carried on the wind like a blessing. Then she and her cub vanished into the darkness, leaving behind only the faint scent of pine and wildflowers and the sound of a baby breathing strong and steady in his mother's arms. For several minutes, the three adults stood in stunned silence. Baby Kai continued to sleep peacefully, his breathing now completely normal, his color healthy and pink. It was as if the crisis of the past few hours had never happened. Tom was the first to speak. "In 62 years of living on this mountain, I've never seen anything like that." He walked closer to where the bear had been sitting, examining the deep paw prints she had left in the soft earth. "These tracks, they're huge. That bear had to weigh at least 400 pounds. Marcus finally found his voice. "Tom, you said your grandfather told you stories about a guardian spirit. What exactly did he tell you?" The older man rubbed his weathered hands together, a gesture Rosalie recognized from her own grandfather when he was about to share something important. "My grandfather was half Cherokee. His grandmother was full-blooded, lived with the tribe before they were forced to relocate. She told him about a woman named Ayana." "Ayana?" Rosalie repeated, feeling a strange chill run down her spine. "It means eternal blossom in Cherokee. According to the stories, Ayana was a medicine woman who lost her own child to a fever. She was so grief-stricken that she went deep into the mountains to die. But before she passed, she made a pact with the Great Spirit. She would give up her human form to become a guardian for all children who lived in these mountains." Tom paused, looking at the spot where the bear had disappeared. The elders said she would take the form of whatever creature was strongest in the forest at the time. In these mountains, that would be a bear. Rosalie felt her legs go weak. She sat down heavily on the porch steps, still clutching baby Kai. "Tom, what was Ayana's English name? Did your grandfather ever tell you?" As a matter of fact, he did. The missionaries gave her the name Rose when she was baptized. Rose Ayana Walker. The words hit Rosalie like a physical blow. Rose Walker was my great-great-grandmother's name. She disappeared in these mountains in 1887. My family always assumed she died in a blizzard, but her body was never found." Marcus sat down beside his wife, his mind reeling. "So, you're saying that bear might have been my ancestor," Rosalie finished, her voice barely above a whisper. "But that's impossible. People don't just become bears." Tom looked at them both seriously. "My grandfather always said the impossible becomes possible when love is strong enough. A mother's love for her child is the strongest force in the universe." As if responding to their conversation, baby Kai stirred in his mother's arms and opened his eyes. But instead of the unfocused gaze of a typical 3-month-old, his eyes seemed alert, almost knowing. He reached up with one tiny hand and touched the wooden cross that hung around his mother's neck. "He's never done that before," Rosalie said, amazed. "He's too young to have that kind of coordination." That's when they noticed something else. The wooden cross Rosalie wore, the one that had been in her family for generations, was warm to the touch. Not just warm from her body heat, but genuinely warm, as if it had been sitting in sunlight. "Let me see that cross," Tom said gently. Rosalie carefully lifted the leather cord over her head and handed it to him. Tom examined it closely under the porch light, turning it over in his hands. On the back, carved in tiny letters that were almost worn smooth by age, were the initials R.A.W. "Rose Ayanna Walker," Tom read aloud. "This cross belonged to her." "But how is that possible?" Marcus asked. Rosalie's grandmother said it had been in the family for generations, but she never mentioned where it came from originally. "Family stories get changed over time," Tom explained. "Maybe your grandmother didn't know the whole truth, or maybe she was protecting you from something she thought you weren't ready to hear." Rosalie took the cross back and held it up to the light. Now that she knew what to look for, she could see other markings on it. Tiny symbols that looked like they might be Cherokee writing. "There's something else," she said slowly. "My grandmother used to have dreams about bears. She told me that whenever someone in our family was in danger, she would dream about a mother bear protecting them. I always thought it was just her imagination." "What if it wasn't?" Marcus said. "What if she was somehow connected to this guardian spirit?" Before anyone could answer, they heard a sound from the forest. Not the bear returning, but something else. It sounded like voices, human voices calling out in the darkness. "Hello? Is anyone there?" The voice was female, young, and filled with panic. Tom immediately grabbed a flashlight from his truck and began walking toward the sound. "Someone's in trouble out there." Marcus started to follow, but Rosalie grabbed his arm. "Don't leave us alone. What if the bear comes back?" "The bear saved our son," Marcus reminded her gently. "I don't think she's going to hurt us." The voices in the forest were getting closer now, and they could hear the sound of people crashing through the underbrush. Suddenly, 2 figures emerged from the tree line. A young woman carrying a small child, and an older man who was limping badly. "Please, help us," the woman called out. "Our car broke down about 2 miles from here, and my daughter is running a high fever. We've been walking for over an hour trying to find help." Rosalie immediately stood up, her maternal instincts kicking in. "Bring her here. Let me see." The woman stumbled toward the porch, and in the light they could see she was probably in her early 20s, with long dark hair and eyes red from crying. The child she carried was maybe 2 years old, and even from a distance, they could see the little girl was very sick. "My name is Eleanor Reeves," the woman said breathlessly. "This is my daughter Sophia, and this is my father Robert. We were driving to the hospital in Asheville when our car just died." Robert Reeves was a man in his 50s, well-dressed, but now disheveled from their trek through the forest. His left leg was clearly injured, and he was using a broken tree branch as a makeshift crutch. "I twisted my ankle pretty bad when we were trying to find the road," he explained. "Elena wanted to keep going, but I couldn't walk any further." Rosalie looked at the sick child and felt her heart break. Little Sophia was burning with fever, her tiny body shaking with chills. The symptoms were eerily similar to what baby Kai had experienced earlier. "We need to get her to a hospital," Rosalie said immediately. "The nearest hospital is 3 hours away," Tom pointed out. "And in this condition, I don't know if she'll make it that long." Elena began to cry again. "I don't know what to do. She's been sick for 2 days, but tonight she got so much worse. I thought we were going to lose her." As if summoned by the mother's distress, they heard a sound from the forest, the same low humming they had heard before. Elena looked around wildly, not understanding what she was hearing. "What is that sound?" she asked fearfully. Before anyone could answer, the mother bear emerged from the tree line again. This time, she wasn't alone. Behind her came not just her own cub, but 2 other adult bears, a male and what appeared to be an elderly female. "Oh my God," Elena whispered, clutching her daughter tighter. "We're going to die." "No," Rosalie said firmly, stepping forward. "They're here to help." The 3 bears approached slowly, their movements deliberate and non-threatening. The mother bear went directly to Elena and her sick daughter, while the male bear positioned himself near Robert's injured leg. The elderly female bear, her fur silver-gray with age, sat down directly in front of the cabin's front door, as if she was standing guard. "This is impossible," Robert said, his voice shaking. "Bears don't behave like this." The mother bear began her humming again, and incredibly, little Sophia stopped crying. The child's fever-bright eyes focused on the massive creature in front of her, and she reached out one small hand toward the bear's face. Elena was torn between terror and hope. What's happening? Why is she reacting to them like this? "The same thing that happened to our son," Rosalie explained quickly. "The bear somehow helped him when he was in crisis." The male bear was now examining Robert's injured ankle with surprising gentleness. Using his massive paw, he began to apply what appeared to be pressure to specific points around the injury. Within minutes, Robert's expression changed from pain to amazement. "The pain is going away," he said in disbelief. "How is that possible?" The elderly female bear was watching all of this with an expression that seemed almost human in its intelligence. She kept looking back and forth between the 2 families, as if she was making sure both groups understood what was happening. "There are 3 of them," Tom observed quietly. 3 generations of bears, just like there are 3 generations of your family represented here tonight, Rosalie. It was true. There was Rosalie's generation, baby Kai representing the newest generation, and Tom representing the older generation that remembered the original stories. "And 3 sick family members," Marcus added. "Kai, Sophia, and Robert's ankle." The pattern was too clear to be coincidence. The bears had appeared to help, but there was something deeper happening here, something that connected all of these people in ways they were only beginning to understand. Little Sophia was now breathing more easily, her fever starting to break. She was looking at the mother bear with the same trusting expression baby Kai had shown earlier. "They're healing them," Elena whispered in awe. "The bears are actually healing them." That's when Rosalie noticed something that made her gasp. Around the neck of the elderly female bear was another leather cord, and hanging from it was not a wooden cross, but a small silver locket, the same kind of locket her grandmother had worn every day of her life. "Grandma's locket," she breathed. "But that's impossible. She was cremated. There's no way. The elderly bear looked directly at Rosalie and made a soft sound. Not quite a growl, but something gentler. Then she stood up and walked over to where Rosalie was standing. With movements that were far too careful and deliberate for a wild animal, the bear reached up with one massive paw and touched the wooden cross that hung around Rosalie's neck. The cross immediately grew warm again, and Rosalie felt a sensation she hadn't experienced since her grandmother's death, the feeling of being completely safe and protected. "It's her," Rosalie whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Grandma, it's really you." The bear, if it truly was her grandmother, leaned forward and gently nuzzled Rosalie's cheek. The gesture was so tender, so unmistakably affectionate, that everyone watching felt their hearts breaking with the beauty of it. But even as this miraculous reunion was taking place, they heard a new sound in the distance, the rumble of multiple engines approaching on the mountain road. Vehicle doors were slamming, and they could hear men's voices calling out orders. "That sounds like the Park Service," Tom said, concerned. "Someone must have reported the bears." The implications hit them all at once. If the Park Service found 3 bears this close to human habitation, especially bears that were showing unusual behavior, they would likely be tranquilized and relocated, or worse. "We have to protect them," Rosalie said urgently. "After what they've done for us, we can't let them be taken away." But the bears had already heard the approaching vehicles. The mother bear immediately moved to shield her cub, while the male bear positioned himself between the humans and the sound of the engines. The elderly female bear, Rosalie's grandmother, looked sadly at her granddaughter one last time. "Don't go," Rosalie pleaded. "Please don't leave us again." The elderly bear touched the wooden cross around Rosalie's neck one more time, and in that moment Rosalie understood. The cross wasn't just a family heirloom, it was a connection, a way for her grandmother to watch over the family even after death. "You're not really leaving, are you?" Rosalie said through her tears. "You'll always be with us." The bear's response was a soft rumble that sounded remarkably like the word "always." As the sound of the approaching vehicles grew louder, the 3 bears began to retreat toward the forest. But just before they disappeared into the darkness, something extraordinary happened. The elderly female bear turned back one final time and, in full view of all 6 humans, raised her massive paw in what could only be described as a wave goodbye. It was a gesture no wild animal should have been able to make, a gesture that proved beyond any doubt that what they had witnessed tonight was not just remarkable animal behavior, but something that transcended the boundaries between human and animal, between life and death, between the possible and the impossible. As the 3 bears disappeared into the forest, the sound of engines grew louder. Within minutes, 3 Park Service vehicles pulled into the clearing, their headlights illuminating the cabin and the 6 people standing in front of it. The lead vehicle stopped, and a tall man in uniform stepped out. "I'm Ranger David Mackenzie," he announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being in charge. "We received reports of aggressive bear activity in this area. Is everyone all right?" Behind him, 2 other rangers emerged from their vehicles, both carrying tranquilizer guns. One of them immediately began examining the large paw prints in the soft earth near the cabin. "These tracks are massive," the second ranger called out. "We're looking at a bear that's probably over 400 pounds, maybe bigger." Tom stepped forward, his years of living in the mountains giving him credibility with the Park Service. "Ranger Mackenzie, there were bears here, but they weren't aggressive. In fact, they helped us." The ranger's eyebrows shot up. "Helped you?" "Sir, bears don't help people. They're wild animals, and when they lose their fear of humans, they become dangerous." Elena, still holding little Sophia, spoke up. "I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. My daughter was burning with fever, and somehow, being near the bears made her better." Ranger Mackenzie looked skeptical. He walked over to Elena and examined the child. Sophia was indeed alert and healthy-looking, showing no signs of the serious illness her mother described. "Ma'am, children's fevers can break suddenly. That's not uncommon," the ranger explained patiently. "But I need to ask all of you to go inside while we search the area. If there are bears nearby that are showing unusual behavior, we need to locate them immediately." "What will you do if you find them?" Rosalie asked, though she was afraid she already knew the answer. "Bears that lose their natural fear of humans have to be relocated or, in extreme cases, put down," Ranger Mackenzie said matter-of-factly. "It's for everyone's safety." The third ranger, a younger woman with short blonde hair, had been quietly examining the area around where the bears had been standing. "Dave, you need to come look at this," she called out. Ranger Mackenzie walked over to where she was kneeling. In the beam of her flashlight, they could see something that made both rangers exchange puzzled glances. "These aren't just random paw prints," the female ranger said. "Look at the pattern. The bears were arranged in a specific formation, almost like they were organized." "Bears don't organize, Sarah," Ranger Mackenzie replied, but his voice lacked conviction. Ranger Sarah continued her examination. "And look at this. There are small objects buried in the dirt here. Looks like they were deliberately placed." She began carefully digging with a small trowel from her kit. What she uncovered made everyone gasp. There, buried in the exact spots where each bear had been standing, were 3 small items: a child's silver bracelet, a man's wedding ring, and an old brass compass. "These have been here for a while," Sarah observed, examining the items. "Probably years, but why would bears bury human objects?" Robert Reeves suddenly went pale. "That's my father's compass," he said in shock. "He lost it on this mountain 15 years ago when we were camping. We searched for hours but never found it." Elena was staring at the silver bracelet. "This looks like the one I lost when I was 7. We were visiting my aunt who used to live about 10 miles from here. I was heartbroken when it disappeared." Tom picked up the wedding ring and examined it under the light. "I'll be damned. This is mine. I lost it 20 years ago when I was helping search for a missing hiker in these woods." The implications of what they were discovering hit everyone at once. The bears hadn't just appeared randomly tonight. They had been collecting items, preserving them, waiting for the right moment to return them to their owners. "This is impossible," Ranger Mackenzie said, but he was staring at the evidence in front of him. "Animals don't collect and preserve human artifacts. They don't organize themselves to help people. And they certainly don't return lost items." That's when they heard it again, the low humming sound coming from deeper in the forest. But this time, it wasn't just one voice. It was a chorus of sounds, as if multiple bears were singing together in harmony. "There are more of them," Sarah whispered. "A lot more." The humming grew louder, and with it came the sound of large bodies moving through the forest. Not running or charging, but walking with purpose. The rangers immediately raised their tranquilizer guns, but Tom held up his hand. "Wait," he said urgently. "Don't shoot. I think they're trying to tell us something." From the tree line emerged not 3 bears, but 7. The original 3 were there, the mother bear, her cub, and the elderly female. But they were accompanied by 4 others. 2 were massive males, easily the largest bears any of them had ever seen. The other 2 appeared to be younger females, possibly the offspring of the elderly bear from previous years. The 7 bears arranged themselves in a precise semicircle around the clearing, their humming creating an otherworldly harmony that seemed to resonate through the very ground beneath their feet. "I've never seen anything like this in 20 years of ranger work," Ranger Mackenzie admitted, slowly lowering his weapon. "This behavior is completely unprecedented." The elderly female bear, the one Rosalie believed was her grandmother, stepped forward from the group. Around her neck, the silver locket caught the light from the vehicle's headlights. But now, in the brighter illumination, they could see that it wasn't just any locket. It was ornate, clearly antique, and there were words engraved on its surface. "Can anyone make out what that locket says?" Sarah asked, raising her binoculars. Rosalie stepped closer, despite the ranger's protests. The bear stood perfectly still, allowing her to approach. When Rosalie was close enough to read the engraving, she felt her knees buckle. "To my beloved Rose, forever your guardian, Charles," she read aloud. "That's my great-great-grandfather's locket. He gave it to Rose Ayanna Walker before she disappeared in these mountains." The bear gently lowered her massive head, bringing the locket within Rosalie's reach. With trembling hands, Rosalie touched the silver surface. It was warm, just like her wooden cross had been, and the moment she made contact, images flashed through her mind. She saw Rose Ayanna Walker as a young woman, beautiful and strong, living in a small cabin much like the one they stood beside now. She saw the tragedy that befell Rose when her infant son died of fever, and the grief that drove her deep into the mountains. But most importantly, she saw the moment of transformation, Rose's spirit merging with the mountain's ancient power, becoming something more than human, but retaining all of her love and protective instincts. "She's been watching over our family for over a century," Rosalie whispered in awe. "Every generation, whenever we've been in danger, she's been there." The mother bear with the cub stepped forward next. Around her neck was the wooden cross they had seen earlier, but in the bright light, they could see it wasn't alone. Hanging beside it were other items: a child's gold ring, a small silver St. Christopher medal, and what looked like a tiny ivory elephant. "Those are all family heirlooms," Rosalie realized, "things that have gone missing over the years." She's been collecting them, keeping them safe. Elena suddenly grabbed her father's arm. "Dad, remember the stories Great-Aunt Margaret used to tell? About the missing jewelry and the guardian spirits?" Robert nodded slowly. "She always said our family was protected by something in these mountains. I thought it was just her imagination." "What if it wasn't?" Elena said. "What if our families have been connected to this place, to these guardian spirits for generations?" Ranger Sarah had been taking photographs and notes throughout this entire exchange. "I have to document this," she said. "No one is going to believe what we're seeing here." That's when one of the massive male bears did something that made everyone's blood run cold. He stood up on his hind legs, all 9 feet of him, and pointed directly at little Sophia with one enormous paw. "He's pointing at my daughter," Elena said, fear creeping back into her voice. But the bear wasn't threatening. Instead, he was trying to communicate something. He pointed at Sophia, then at himself, then at the forest behind him. "I think he wants us to follow him," Tom said. "He wants to show us something." "Absolutely not," Ranger Mackenzie said firmly. "I'm not letting civilians follow a group of bears into the forest at night." But baby Kai, who had been sleeping peacefully in his mother's arms, suddenly woke up and began reaching toward the pointing bear. His little hands opened and closed as if he was trying to grab something only he could see. "He wants to go too," Rosalie said in amazement. "It's like he understands what they're trying to tell us." The elderly female bear, Rose Ayanna, moved closer to Ranger Mackenzie. She looked directly into his eyes, and for a moment, The hardened park ranger saw something that shook him to his core. Intelligence, pleading, and something else, a profound sadness mixed with desperate hope. "There's something out there," Mackenzie said slowly. "Something they want us to see. But this goes against every protocol I've ever learned." "Sometimes protocols don't account for miracles," Tom said quietly. Sarah looked at her superior officer. "Dave, what if we're not just dealing with bears? What if we're dealing with something that science can't explain yet?" Before Mackenzie could answer, they heard a new sound from the forest. Not the humming of the bears, but something else. It sounded like a child crying, but it was distant and weak, as if it was coming from far away. The 7 bears immediately became agitated. Their humming stopped, and they began moving restlessly, looking back and forth between the humans and the forest. "There's someone else out there," Elena said. "Someone who needs help." The mother bear with the cub ran to Elena and gently nudged her with her massive head, then turned toward the forest and back again. The message was clear. "Follow me." "We have to go," Rosalie said. "If there's a child out there in danger, we can't just stand here." "This could be a trap," Mackenzie warned. "Bears have been known to lead humans away from safety." "These aren't ordinary bears," Marcus pointed out. "Everything they've done tonight has been to help us, not hurt us." The crying from the forest grew louder, more desperate. It was definitely a child's voice, and it was filled with terror and pain. "That settles it," Tom said, grabbing his flashlight. "I'm going. I've lived in these mountains all my life, and I'm not about to let a child suffer when I can help." One by one, the others made the same decision. Even Ranger Mackenzie, despite his training and protocols, couldn't ignore the sound of a child in distress. "All right," he said reluctantly, "but we do this my way. Stay together, stay behind the rangers, and if anything goes wrong, we retreat immediately." The 7 bears seemed to understand that the humans had agreed to follow them. They arranged themselves in a protective formation around the group. 3 bears in front, 2 on each side, and 2 bringing up the rear. It was a level of organization and cooperation that defied everything the rangers knew about bear behavior. As they began walking into the forest, following the ancient trails that wound through the pine trees, Rosalie felt the wooden cross around her neck growing warm again. She looked back at the cabin one last time, then at the bears surrounding them. Whatever they were about to discover in the depths of the forest, she knew it would change all of their lives forever. The guardian spirits that had watched over her family for generations were finally ready to reveal the secret they had been protecting. The secret that would explain not just the bears' miraculous healing abilities, but the true reason why certain families had been drawn to live in these mountains for over a century. As they walked deeper into the darkness, the crying ahead of them grew louder, and Rosalie realized with growing certainty that they were about to uncover something that would rewrite everything they thought they knew about the boundary between the natural and supernatural worlds. The wooden cross around her neck pulsed with warmth, as if her great-great-grandmother Rose was trying to tell her that after more than 100 years of waiting, the time had finally come to reveal the mountain's greatest secret. The group moved deeper into the forest, guided by the 7 bears who seemed to know exactly where they were going. The crying ahead of them grew more distinct, and now they could tell it was definitely a young child, maybe 4 or 5 years old, based on the pitch of the voice. "How far are we going?" Ranger Mackenzie asked, checking his GPS device. "We're already half a mile from the road." The elderly female bear, Rosa Yana, turned back to look at him, and Mackenzie could have sworn she shook her massive head as if to say, "Not much further." The intelligence in her eyes was undeniable now, even to someone trained to think of bears as simple animals. As they walked, Sarah noticed something strange about their path. "These aren't random game trails," she observed. "Someone carved these paths deliberately. Look at how straight they are, how carefully the branches have been cleared." Tom examined the trail more closely with his flashlight. "You're right. This is human work, but it's old, very old. Some of these cuts in the trees have been healed over for decades." "Who would have made trails this deep in the wilderness?" Elena asked, shifting little Sophia to her other arm. The child was completely healthy now, alert and looking around with curiosity rather than fear. "The Cherokee," Robert answered. "Before they were forced off this land, they had settlements throughout these mountains. Some of the elder families stayed hidden rather than relocate." The mother bear with the cub suddenly stopped and let out a low warning sound. All 7 bears immediately became alert, their heads turning towards something the humans couldn't see or hear yet. "What is it?" Marcus whispered, instinctively pulling Rosalie and baby Kai closer to him. That's when they heard it. Not just the crying of the child, but adult voices as well. Men's voices, angry and getting closer. "Search every cave, every hollow," one voice commanded. The kid couldn't have gotten far. "What if the bears got him?" another voice replied. "We heard reports of unusual bear activity in this area." Ranger Mackenzie immediately radioed his headquarters. "This is Mackenzie. We have a possible search and rescue situation in progress, requesting backup and medical support." The response crackled back through the static. "Negative, Mackenzie. We have no reports of missing children in your sector." "Then who are those men?" Sarah whispered. The bears had begun moving again, but now their formation was different. The 4 largest males formed a protective barrier around the humans, while the mother bear, her cub, and the elderly female moved ahead to scout. As they crested a small ridge, they could see lights below them, flashlights and what looked like vehicle headlights. In a small clearing about 200 yards ahead, several men in dark clothing were systematically searching the area. "Those aren't Park Service uniforms," Mackenzie observed through his binoculars. "And they're not local law enforcement either." That's when they saw the child. A little boy, maybe 5 years old, was hiding behind a fallen log at the edge of the clearing. He was trying to stay quiet, but his terrified sobs were what they had been hearing. "We have to help him," Elena said immediately. "Wait," Tom grabbed her arm. "Something's not right here. If these men are looking for a lost child, why is the kid hiding from them?" One of the men below called out, "Come on out, Danny. Your daddy's waiting for you. No one's going to hurt you." But the child only pressed himself deeper behind the log, clearly terrified of the men who claimed to be helping him. The elderly female bear, Rose Ayana, moved closer to Rosalie and gently nudged her with her massive head. Then she did something extraordinary. She began to make sounds that weren't quite growls or humming, but something in between. It took Rosalie a moment to realize what she was hearing. "She's trying to talk," Rosalie whispered in amazement. "She's actually trying to form words." The bear's sounds were rough and distorted, but they were unmistakably attempts at human speech. "Dan, Nai, Dan, Jur. Danny is in danger," Marcus translated. "She's warning us about the boy." Ranger Sarah had been using her binoculars to study the men below. "Dave, these guys have military-grade equipment. Night vision, tactical gear, and those aren't search and rescue radios they're carrying." Before Mackenzie could respond, one of the men below spotted their lights on the ridge. "Contact! We have people on the north ridge." The men immediately began moving toward their position, and now the humans could see they were armed with more than just flashlights. "We need to get out of here," Mackenzie said urgently. "This isn't a rescue operation. It's something else entirely." But the bears had other plans. The 4 large males immediately positioned themselves between the approaching men and the group of humans. The mother bear ran directly toward the little boy hiding behind the log, while Rose Ayana stayed close to Rosalie. They're going to protect us, Rosalie realized. All of us, including that little boy. What happened next defied everything any of them thought they knew about animal behavior. The mother bear reached the frightened child and, instead of frightening him further, began making the same gentle humming sound they had heard earlier. The little boy looked up at the massive creature looming over him, and instead of screaming, he reached out his small hand and touched her fur. "Mama Bear," they heard the child whisper. "Mama Bear came to save me." The men who had been chasing the boy froze when they saw the enormous bear protecting him, but their hesitation only lasted a moment before their leader barked orders. "Trank the bear! Get the kid!" That's when all 7 bears began to move at once. It was like watching a perfectly choreographed dance of protection and power. The 4 males created a wall of fur and muscle between the armed men and everyone else, while the mother bear carefully picked up little Danny in her massive jaws, not to hurt him, but to carry him to safety, the way a mother cat carries her kittens. "This is incredible," Sarah breathed, filming everything with her phone. "They're working together like a military unit." The elderly female bear, Rose Ayana, suddenly reared up on her hind legs and let out a roar that echoed through the entire forest. It wasn't a sound of aggression, but a call, and it was answered. From every direction came the sounds of more bears responding to her call. Not just a few, but what sounded like dozens of them, their voices creating a chorus that seemed to shake the very mountains. "How many bears live in this area?" Elena asked in amazement. "Not this many," Mackenzie answered, his voice filled with awe. "There aren't supposed to be more than a dozen bears in this entire mountain range." But the sounds they were hearing suggested there were many more than a dozen. The men below, who had seemed so confident just moments before, were now backing toward their vehicles as the forest around them came alive with the sounds of approaching bears. "Fall back! Fall back!" their leader shouted. "This area is compromised." As the men retreated, the mother bear gently set little Danny down next to Rosalie. The child was unharmed but clearly traumatized. He clung to the bear's fur as if she was the only safe thing in his world. "It's okay, sweetheart," Rosalie said softly, kneeling down to the boy's level. "You're safe now. Can you tell us your name?" "Danny Morrison," the boy said in a small voice. "Those bad men took me from my mommy. They said they were police, but they weren't wearing the right clothes." The implications hit everyone at once. This wasn't a lost child, this was a kidnapping, and somehow the bears had known to intervene. "Danny, where's your mommy now?" Elena asked gently. "She's at the hospital," Danny said. "She was hurt when the bad men came to our house. Grandpa Joe told me to run and hide, but they followed me." Tom's face went pale. "Joe Morrison is my neighbor. His daughter Sarah lives in town with her boy. If something happened to them..." He immediately pulled out his cell phone, but there was no signal this deep in the forest. "We need to get this child to safety and contact the authorities," Mackenzie said. "But first, we need to understand what just happened here." Rose Ayana approached little Danny and gently touched his forehead with her massive paw. The boy looked up at her with complete trust, as if he somehow understood that this enormous predator was actually his protector. "Grandpa Joe told me stories about the guardian bears," Danny said matter-of-factly. "He said they protect kids when their families can't. I knew if I prayed hard enough they would come." "Guardian bears," Sarah repeated. "Is that what the local families call them?" My grandfather called them that too, Tom said. I thought it was just folklore, but maybe... He was interrupted by a new sound, the distant rumble of vehicles departing. The men who had been pursuing Danny were apparently retreating, discouraged by the unexpected intervention of the bears. But as the sound of engines faded, they became aware of something else. The forest around them was full of eyes, dozens of pairs of eyes reflecting their flashlight beams. The bears that had answered Rose Ayana's call were still there, watching, waiting. "We're surrounded," Mackenzie said, but his voice held wonder rather than fear. "Protected," Rosalie corrected. "We're protected." One by one, bears began emerging from the shadows. Not 7, not a dozen, but more than 20 of them. Some were massive adults, others were smaller females with cubs, and a few appeared to be adolescents. They formed a vast circle around the clearing, their presence both awe-inspiring and deeply comforting. "This is impossible," Sarah whispered. "There aren't supposed to be this many bears in the entire state, let alone in one location." The elderly female bear, Rose Ayana, walked to the center of the circle and began making sounds again. Not the humming they had heard before, but something different. Something that sounded almost like speech. "Fam, I, lie," the bear managed to vocalize, the word distorted but unmistakable. "Tect, fam, I, lie." Danny clapped his hands together. "She's talking. Grandpa Joe said the guardian bears could talk if they needed to." Tom stared at his neighbor's grandson. "Danny, what else did your grandfather tell you about these bears?" The little boy looked around at the massive creatures surrounding them, with obvious delight rather than fear. "He said they used to be people who loved their families so much that when they died, they asked to stay and keep protecting everyone. The mountain spirits said yes, but they had to become bears to do it." "That's just a story, son," Mackenzie said gently. But Rose Ayana heard him and shook her massive head. She walked over to a large, flat rock in the center of the clearing and, using her claws, began to scratch marks into the stone. The marks weren't random. They were symbols, possibly Cherokee writing. "She's writing," Marcus said in disbelief. "A bear is actually writing." Sarah immediately began photographing the symbols. "I have a contact at the university who specializes in Cherokee language and symbols. If these mean something..." As Rose Ayana continued to scratch symbols into the rock, more bears approached and began adding their own marks. Within minutes, the stone was covered with what appeared to be a complex message. "It's like they're all signing their names," Elena observed, "or maybe telling us who they used to be." That's when little Danny surprised them all by walking up to the rock and running his small finger along some of the symbols. "This one says Rose," he announced confidently. "And this one says Joseph. And this one..." He paused, concentrating. "This one says Sarah." "How can you read Cherokee symbols?" Tom asked in amazement. "Grandpa Joe taught me," Danny said simply. "He said our family needed to remember the old ways because someday the guardian bears would need our help." The implications of what the child was telling them began to sink in. If the bears really were the spirits of people who had died protecting their families, and if certain families had been chosen to remember and help them, then what they were witnessing wasn't just miraculous. It was the culmination of a century-old pact between the living and the dead. Rose Ayana finished her writing and looked directly at Rosalie. She pointed to one set of symbols, then to the wooden cross around Rosalie's neck, then back to the symbols. "She's telling me this symbol represents our family line," Rosalie said, understanding flooding through her. "All these symbols, they're family names. The bears aren't just random spirits, they're our ancestors. people who died in these mountains over the past century, people who loved their families so much they chose to stay as guardians. The mother bear with the cub approached the rock and added her own symbols. When she finished, she looked at Elena and little Sophia. "That's us," Elena whispered. "She's showing us that we're part of this too." One by one, each bear in the circle approached the rock and added their symbols. When they were finished, the stone told a story spanning more than 100 years, the story of families who had lived and died in these mountains, and the spirits who had chosen to remain as eternal protectors. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. As the last bear finished writing, Danny walked up to a section of symbols they hadn't noticed before, symbols that were clearly much older than the others. "This part is really old," Danny said, tracing the ancient markings with his finger. "Grandpa Joe showed me these symbols in his old books. They're not Cherokee. They're from the people who lived here before the Cherokee." "Before the Cherokee?" Sarah asked. "That would make these symbols thousands of years old." Danny nodded seriously. "Grandpa Joe said the guardian bears have been protecting families in these mountains since the very beginning. The Cherokee learned about them from the people who came before, and then white families learned about them from the Cherokee. It's been going on forever." The realization hit them all at once. The guardian bears weren't just a recent phenomenon, or even something that began with Rose Ayanna Walker's transformation. They were part of an ancient tradition that had been protecting families in these mountains for thousands of years. "We're not just witnesses to something miraculous," Rosalie said, her voice filled with awe. "We're the latest chapter in a story that's been going on since the dawn of human civilization in these mountains." Rose Ayanna let out a satisfied rumble and touched the wooden cross around Rosalie's neck one more time. Then she turned to little Danny and gently nuzzled his cheek with her massive head. "Thank you, guardian bears," Danny whispered. "Thank you for saving me and keeping my family safe." As if his words were a signal, all 20-plus bears began to move. But instead of disappearing back into the forest, they began walking in a specific direction, clearly expecting the humans to follow them. "Where are they taking us now?" Mackenzie wondered aloud. Danny took Rosalie's hand trustingly. "To the heart of the mountain," he said matter-of-factly. "That's where all the guardian bears live together. Grandpa Joe said someday, if our families were ever in really big trouble, the guardian bears would take us there to keep us safe." As they began following the massive procession of bears deeper into the mountains, Rosalie realized that their night of miracles was far from over. Whatever lay ahead at this heart of the mountain would likely be the most incredible revelation yet in a night already filled with impossibilities. The wooden cross around her neck continued to pulse with warmth, and she could feel the presence of her great-great-grandmother Rose walking beside her in the form of the massive bear. After more than a century of protection from the shadows, the guardian bears were finally ready to show their human families the secret sanctuary they had been guarding all along. The procession of 20-plus bears led them through paths that seemed to exist outside of normal geography. The trail wound upward through ancient pines that grew larger and more majestic with each step, their trunks so massive that it would take 6 people holding hands to encircle them. The air itself felt different here, charged with an energy that made their skin tingle and their hearts beat in rhythm with something greater than themselves. "How long have we been walking?" Elena asked, though she didn't feel tired despite carrying Sophia for what seemed like hours. Sarah checked her GPS device and frowned. "That's impossible. According to this, we haven't moved at all. We're still showing the same coordinates as when we started." "We're not in normal space anymore," little Danny said matter-of-factly, skipping alongside the massive bears as if they were friendly dogs. "Grandpa Joe said the heart of the mountain exists between the world we know and the world of spirits. As they climbed higher, the forest around them began to change in ways that defied natural law. Flowers bloomed that had no earthly names, their petals glowing softly in colors that shouldn't exist. Streams of water flowed upward, creating impossible waterfalls that fell toward the sky, and through it all, the bears moved with reverent purpose, as if they were approaching something sacred. "Look ahead," Marcus whispered, pointing up the trail. In the distance they could see light, not the harsh white of electric bulbs or even the warm yellow of fire, but something that seemed to emanate from the very air itself. It was the same gentle glow that surrounded the bear's mysterious healing abilities, but magnified 1,000-fold. As they crested the final ridge, the sight before them took their breath away. Spread out in a vast natural amphitheater was a settlement unlike anything any of them had ever imagined. Dozens of cabins and structures, all built from materials that seemed to be part of the mountain itself, arranged in perfect harmony with the landscape. Gardens flourished impossibly, growing foods and flowers from every season simultaneously. And throughout the settlement, moving with purpose and peace, were hundreds of bears. But these weren't ordinary bears. As the group watched in amazement, they could see that the creatures moved with human intelligence and purpose. Some tended gardens with tools adapted for their massive paws. Others appeared to be crafting items from wood and stone, with an artistry that surpassed human capability. And at the center of it all, in a structure that seemed to grow directly from the living rock of the mountain, was a sight that made Rosalie's heart nearly stop. Seated on a natural throne of stone and surrounded by the soft glow that permeated everything in this place, was a figure that was neither fully bear nor fully human, but something transcendent that combined the best of both. The being was clearly female, with the powerful frame of a great bear, but the grace and wisdom of an ancient woman. Around her neck hung not just one cross or locket, but dozens of them. Every family heirloom, every precious memory that had been entrusted to the guardian bears over the centuries. "Rose Ayanna Walker," Rosalie whispered, and the figure's head turned toward her with eyes that held the accumulated love and wisdom of more than a century. When Rose Ayanna spoke, her voice was both the deep rumble of a bear and the gentle cadence of the Cherokee language, but somehow everyone understood her perfectly. "Welcome home, my children," she said, her words carrying the weight of generations. "You have been called here because the time of secrets is ending. The world beyond these mountains grows dark with anger and fear, but here, love has built something eternal." Little Danny broke free from the group and ran directly to the throne. Without fear, he climbed up onto Rose Ayanna's massive lap and hugged her around the neck. "Grandpa Joe said you were beautiful," he said simply. He was right. Rose Ayanna's laughter was like the sound of a mountain stream mixed with wind chimes. "Joseph sees me with the eyes of love, little one, as do all my family." She gestured around the incredible settlement. "Every soul you see here chose love over death, chose service over rest. When their human bodies could no longer protect their families, they came here and were transformed. Some, like me, became the great guardians who watch over entire bloodlines. Others became the smaller protectors who watch over individual children. But all chose the same thing, to never stop loving, never stop protecting." Ranger Mackenzie, his worldview completely shattered and rebuilt in the space of a single night, found his voice. "How is any of this possible?" "Love," Rose Ayanna answered simply. "Love is the strongest force in any universe, Ranger Mackenzie. Strong enough to transcend death, strong enough to reshape reality itself. These mountains recognized that truth long before humans had words for it." She turned to address the group as a whole. You were brought here tonight for 3 reasons. First, because young Kai needed healing that could only come from the source of all our power. She gestured to baby Kai, who was now glowing with the same soft light that suffused everything in this place. He will grow up to be a bridge between your world and ours, able to call upon the guardian bears when humanity's need is greatest. Second, because little Sophia needed to understand her heritage. Elena gasped as she looked at her daughter, who was now looking around with eyes that held far more awareness than any 2-year-old should possess. She carries the bloodline of the first Cherokee medicine woman who made the pact with these mountains. Her gifts will awaken as she grows. And third, because young Danny needed to be shown his destiny. The little boy beamed as Rose Ayana continued. His grandfather, Joseph, has served as keeper of the old knowledge for 40 years. When he passes on, Danny will take his place, teaching new generations about the guardian bears and ensuring the protection continues. Rose Ayana stood from her throne, her massive form both intimidating and infinitely comforting. But most importantly, you were brought here because the time has come for the world to know. The guardian bears can no longer protect families by hiding in shadows. Humanity faces challenges that will require all of us, living and transformed, working together. She approached each family member in turn, touching them gently with her massive paw. Where she touched them, each person began to glow with the same soft light. You are marked now, she explained. Marked as ambassadors between our worlds. When you return to your normal lives, you will carry a piece of our power with you. When others see the love and peace you radiate, they will begin to believe in possibilities beyond their current understanding. Tom, tears streaming down his weathered face, knelt before the great being. What do you need us to do? Live with open hearts, Rose Ayana replied. Love without condition. Protect without hesitation. And when the time comes, and you will know when it comes, call upon us. The guardian bears will answer, not just to protect your families, but to help heal a world that has forgotten how to love. As the first rays of dawn began to filter through the impossible sky of the heart of the mountain, Rose Ayana raised her massive arms. It is time for you to return, but know that you will never truly leave this place. It lives in your hearts now, as you live in ours. The settlement around them began to fade, not disappearing but becoming translucent, as if they were seeing it through multiple layers of reality at once. Will we see you again? Rosalie asked, tears flowing freely. Every day, Rose Ayana promised. In every act of love, every moment of protection, every choice to put family before self. We are always with you, my dear ones. Always. The last thing they saw before the vision faded completely was the sight of hundreds of guardian bears standing in perfect formation, their massive paws raised in salute to the humans who would carry their message back to the world. When the mist cleared, they found themselves standing in the clearing outside Rosalie and Marcus's cabin. The sun was rising over the mountains, painting everything in shades of gold and pink. But they were not the same people who had stood in this spot the night before. Each of them glowed with a soft, warm light that seemed to come from within. Baby Kai was completely healthy, his eyes bright with an intelligence that seemed far beyond his months. Little Sophia babbled happily in her mother's arms, occasionally pointing at empty spaces as if she could see things the adults couldn't. And Danny Morrison stood tall and proud, no longer a frightened, kidnapped child, but a young keeper of ancient wisdom. Did that really happen? Sarah asked, looking at the photographs on her phone. Every image showed nothing but ordinary bears in normal forest settings. Look, Tom said quietly, pointing to the ground where they stood. There, pressed deep into the earth around them, were the paw prints of dozens of bears arranged in perfect circles. And in the center of each circle, carved into stones that definitely hadn't been there the night before, were the symbols they had seen the guardian bears write. Symbols that told the story of eternal love and protection. Ranger Mackenzie stood in the center of the circles, slowly turning around to take in the evidence. "I don't know how I'm going to write this report," he said finally. "You don't have to," Danny said wisely. "The people who need to believe will believe. The people who aren't ready yet will think of other explanations, but the truth is here now, in the world, and it will spread when it's supposed to." As if summoned by his words, they heard the sound of vehicles approaching. Within minutes, the clearing was filled with emergency responders, federal agents, and Tom's neighbor Joe Morrison, who had come looking for his missing grandson. "Danny!" Joe cried, running to embrace the boy. "We've been searching for you all night. Your mother is worried sick." "Grandpa Joe," Danny said seriously, "the guardian bears came. They showed us the heart of the mountain. Everything you told me is true." Joe Morrison looked at his grandson, then at the glowing faces of the adults around him, and finally at the stone circles with their ancient symbols. A slow smile spread across the old man's face. "I know, son," he said quietly. "I've been waiting my whole life for this night." In the days that followed, the story spread exactly as the guardian bears had intended. Most people dismissed it as an elaborate hoax or mass hallucination, but some believed. Parents who had lost children found comfort in the knowledge that love could transcend death. Families in crisis discovered strength they didn't know they possessed. And slowly, quietly, the world began to change. Rosalie Chen became a sought-after speaker on family resilience and spiritual healing. Elena Reeves started a foundation to protect missing children, with an uncanny ability to locate kids who had been given up for lost. Tom Brennan became the unofficial historian of the guardian bear tradition, collecting stories from families throughout the region who had their own encounters with protective spirits. And Rangers David Mackenzie and Sarah established a new protocol for unusual wildlife encounters that focused on protection and understanding rather than control and relocation. But perhaps the most important changes were the quiet ones. Baby Kai grew up surrounded by an aura of peace that calmed everyone around him. Little Sophia developed an extraordinary gift for sensing when other children were in danger. And Danny Morrison spent his afternoons with his grandfather, learning the old stories and preparing for his role as the next keeper of ancient wisdom. On quiet evenings when the mountain mist rolled through the valleys, families throughout the region would sometimes catch glimpses of massive shapes moving through the trees. And children who had been taught to listen with their hearts would hear the soft humming that meant love was watching over them. The wooden cross that had belonged to Rose Ayana Walker now hung in a place of honor in Rosalie's home, warm to the touch and glowing softly whenever baby Kai was near. And sometimes on very special nights when the moon was full and the mountain spirits were particularly close to the human world, visitors to the Chen family cabin would swear they could see the ghostly outline of an enormous bear standing guard in the yard, her ancient eyes full of eternal love and unbreakable protection. The guardian bears had kept their promise. Love had found a way to bridge the gap between worlds and families throughout the mountains, and eventually throughout the world, would never have to face their darkest moments alone. In the end, the most shocking thing about the mother bear who paced on two legs when baby Kai's pulse dropped wasn't that she saved his life. It was that she proved, once and for all, that love truly is the strongest force in the universe, strong enough to transcend death, strong enough to transform the impossible into the inevitable, and strong enough to ensure that no child anywhere ever has to suffer alone. The mountain spirits had spoken, and their message was simple. Family is forever, love never dies, and guardian angels sometimes wear fur and stand 9 feet tall. And in the quiet moments between day and night, when the world grows still and hearts open to possibilities beyond understanding, you can still hear them humming their ancient lullabies, watching over all the children of the world with the fierce, tender love that only a mother's heart can hold.